I would now like to introduce your host for today's conference, Mr. Michael Dugan, Chief Information Officer and Senior Vice President of Operations for the Federation of State Medical Boards. Mr. Dugan, you may begin the conference.
Thank you, operator. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on our webinar, Physician Credentialing and Blockchain Technology. Many of you have heard of the technology called blockchain that has received a great deal of attention in the media lately, especially for its potential to transform processes, including physician credentialing. Due to this great interest, FSMB has been researching the technology and its applicability to state medical boards. Our webinar will highlight some of the work to date, we hope begin a meaningful conversation with you about the future state of technology in medical regulation. In addition to our overview conversation, we will also show you some of our work which we recently completed on a pilot project using a blockchain application called BlockCerts. I'm pleased to have with me today Eric Fish, who is FSMB's Senior Vice President for Legal Services, and Eric will kick us off. This is our agenda. We'll go a little bit of background, activity in the market. We'll talk about the demo and the next steps. So with that, I will hand it over to Eric.
Well, thank you, Mike. And as Mike alluded to, this is really a hot topic in a lot of areas of society, from finance to medical licensure to supply chain issues. And as it's applied to what our state boards do, I really approach the use of blockchain in two different ways. The first is a philosophical approach, asking the questions that are really at the core of regulation, questions about trust and accountability. As we know, trust is the greatest building block of social order and regulation. In a way, seeking medical treatment is a huge leap of faith without trust and accountability, because you're not sure that you're going to walk in and walk out in a better state. State boards are really there to create and enforce the standards that create and derive the trust in society. And to get licensed or credentialed, we boil this down to what a physician needs to prove about him or herself, their abilities, their past activities and behaviors, and we need to validate those attributes to ensure that the public trusts the system and regulators can do their job. As we look at it, it's not really a question of who you are for regulators, it's a question of what you are. What are the attributes you can rely upon to believe that, for a state board to believe that that physician can provide safe and competent care. The second approach is really more of a approach that talks about this as an update to the technology that's used to regulate. As I say, updating the plumbing in an old house. The existing challenges that the regulator faces and what the state is critiqued about turn around to the idea of you've got to be better, you've got to be faster, you've got to be more transparent. All these things that we've heard from federal individuals looking to create a federal license, to state regulators and state licensees saying, well, move this process faster. We need to improve our system, or else those critiques are going to continue the narrative. And so we have to approach this in a way that updates the technology so that we can foster the trust, we can improve the data that we use, we can move those things faster. And I think in a way blockchain and some of the technology behind that offers that promise. It's my personal belief, if you can't tell, that we're really at a paradigm shift in how we regulate. We're not necessarily going to replace regulation. We're not going to replace state boards. We're not going to replace the role of the regulatory state. I know there are some here in D.C. that would love to do that, but we need to create new methods to regulate and do the job that your states and the public believes that you do day in and day out. And blockchain, again, offers some promise in that. As a way, it's updating the plumbing in an old house. You've got a great structure. You need to do some interior improvements. Historically, the approach to this has been to layer upon layer upon layer. Let's just ask more questions. Let's just make the licensee go through more hoops. There's a cycle there of increased trust and then increased frustration. For every level of trust, there's more steps to comply with, more processes. In a way, there's more laws you have to worry about. You have to have more opportunities to ask these questions that then get reviewed by Department of Justice or others to make sure that they comply with federal standards. And it's also, as you make the system more complex, you increase the opportunities to miss important parts of that information through the data flows. So we've addressed that together, working with state boards and you all working with the FSMB. We've improved a lot of processes. This is just a continuation of that study. There's the technologies out there that are going to be of value, and they have that promise, but we also have to go very cautiously. We don't want to get into a hype cycle and undo good things that we've done already. The really core to the blockchain is a concept called distributed ledger technology. Put simply, distributed ledgers are just a different approach to sharing information across a network of actors that allows for the sharing of various trust signals and information and independent actions and allows an individual to receive those actions. We are really talking about taking a traditional data management process where there's a central authority and improving it in a way that creates decentralization. Each individual is their own authority, but there's a way to trust that a signal or a piece of information or a piece of data you get from another person can be relied upon directly without going through a central authority. Now we deal with this in a fairly manual way. Schools, graduate programs, licensing boards will share information if asked. It's not out there. You have to go out and seek it. The promise of the distributed ledger is that you take this information and make it more of a pool. You create a central pool of data that's trusted. It's governed in a way that's fair and in line with the rules and regulations that you will have to deal with. It creates a log of information. You don't have to go through an intermediary. It's openly shared amongst you or whoever you want in this ecosystem, and it's governed by rules agreed to by the party. These rules are really what you would be smart contracts. It's a blending of technology and contract law to say that if a certain individual with certain unique digital identity or digital capabilities puts something into this pool, it can be trusted. It also has a way to address what if there's a difference in some of the data that 2 or 3 people put in there. How do we rectify that situation? In a way, the compact is somewhat of a way that this could work. There's a validation of core identity elements that's made by a state, the state of principal licensure, and others are relying upon it. A smart contract, that is really sort of the same principle. You just embed it into a computer code, so if you're working within an ecosystem, you do that, it's automatically, and it's checked out, and if everything is good, everyone can rely upon that. Distributed ledgers can take many forms. It's really based upon the terms agreed to of the players in that space. The blockchain is the most cited and referenced approach to building this decentralized digital ledger. Just a little bit of history, and a lot of people use the term distributed ledger and blockchain sort of independently or to use it synonymously. The blockchain itself was originally designed for the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. That emerged from sort of a distrust of existing institutions. The 2008 financial crisis really perpetuated a loss in the financial institutions and the regulatory system. Around that time, there was a pseudonymous paper written by Satoshi Nakamoto. This individual or group of individuals, true identity is not known, but that paper really went about and solved a cryptographic puzzle that created a system that would ensure that currency, a dollar or in this case a Bitcoin, could be exchanged while at the same time preventing what would be called a double spend. That would be spending the same dollar or Bitcoin in 2 places. In that transaction, that's to make sure that you and I know that we've been given the same thing and that one of us has been duped because you can only have one of those things. So there's a lot of cryptography behind it. I think I'll spare you the details of it because even the smartest people I've known who've tried to explain this can't do it. It's at a high mathematical level. But really the core of this approach was to increase trust in a sort of trustless and decentralized environment. The algorithm used to architect that trust really ensures that each transaction is a unique transaction and can be accounted for. Each action can be verified by others in the system, and others can check it and see sort of a history of those transactions. The history of these transactions are stored in what are called blocks, and the blocks are updated sequentially. They can never be overwritten. They can never be edited. Basically, this is the entire history of anything that's ever happened about this transaction occurring between multiple parties. The owners of the asset being validated on the blockchain possess it in what would be called a digital wallet. That's a colloquial term to describe a system of private keys that can be shared so that you, as a relying party, can see that the owner, say myself, does actually in fact own and is sharing a true copy of a identity attribute. This will become a little bit more clear in the demo you see how exactly it would work. An individual would send their key to a board can receive it, check it, and sort of the background architecture of that. But before letting Mike go into the current state of blockchain and the FSMB's demos, I want to leave you with the following. The blockchain creates records that are immutable and transparent by being distributed across the participant ecosystem. Really what is important is that the application of technology to improve an interaction between multiple parties where trust and accountability are really the keys.
Thank you, Eric. And I will, real quick, on the current state, we call it blockchain mania, but I think what we're seeing is that there are, I think the quote that the champions see it as a hammer and everything else is a nail is a good analogy. The blockchain space has a lot of venture capital backing, and therefore many people are trying to create a go-to-market strategy and create a tool that they can sell. So that has been part of this. I think a lot of the hype has also been around the value of Bitcoin, which in the last half of, well, really all of 2017 was very volatile and reached quite high valuations. That has received less press lately because the value has dropped, and the little bit of tracking that I do, it seems to have stabilized. It still fluctuates, but in a much smaller range than we saw previously. But as far as Bitcoin and the value of it, you can really ignore it related to these sorts of systems that we're discussing. There's more than 100 flavors, if you will, of blockchain, which are different products that you could buy to implement a blockchain project. So we talked about Bitcoin. Our demo was created using the Bitcoin blockchain, but you may have also heard of Ethereum, Litecoin, and if you've seen the IBM blockchain commercials, they're involved in a product called Hyperledger, and there are many other examples. Gartner is an IT research firm. They track this space, and some key points from them that from a recent meeting from one of their blockchain analysts is that wide adoption is still 5 to 10 years away. They feel that banking and insurance will be ahead of healthcare in implementing the technology, which I think in technology in general, those two industries are ahead of healthcare. And what I thought was an important point was that blockchain should be used to reimagine business processes, business models, markets, and products instead of seeing it as a tool to improve current and existing processes. So with that in mind, I will throw it back to Eric and some activity.
Yeah, and on that last point, as Mike pointed out, there's a lot of interest in it about reimagining how things could work. And in 2016, the first, at least in the healthcare space, the first big push by the federal government was a study or a white paper contest that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of the National Coordinator put together. The ONC operates a technology lab and conducts these innovation challenges to see what ideas are out there. They called for white papers to be submitted on the topic of blockchain technology and its, quote, potential use in health IT to address privacy, security, scalability, and manage electronic health records and resources. Really, that is the golden ring for a lot of people who put in these papers of, can we use blockchain to create a better EHR? I personally think that's going to be a very tough project. There are issues related to privacy that I don't think that the blockchain right now and as envisioned truly address. There's also a problem that a lot of people have put a lot of money into EHRs over the past 5 years, and they're not going to want to flush all that money and infrastructure down the drain. But out of this this challenge came some other papers, one of which addressed credentialing uses. Is actually put in by an individual that Mike and I have worked with, who's now at CAQH studying the issue. So we see some federal interest. We also are seeing interest at the state level. Delaware has a blockchain initiative. They were one of the early states to take a look at how they would have to reform state law to address blockchain issues. Part of that was done because of blockchain's been proposed to be used as a way to do shareholder voting and governance, and if your company is incorporated in Delaware, if you could do that sort of big voting for publicly held companies on the blockchain, that would be a huge improvement, some see. And Illinois is also being really one of the first into this field, and they're looking at it from a variety of different areas, financial, regulatory. In fact, Mike and I were able to see a demo from a system that's actually being used in Illinois for license renewal for respiratory therapists. The identity information is being shared across the blockchain, and although it's a small subset of individual licensees, it does show that the system could work and is being used. We're seeing now more and more interest from federal, state interest. Some of this might be part of the hype cycle. There's a U.S. House of Representatives hearing on this that I attended. I think as we saw even yesterday, when some of the federal legislators talk about the technology, it's a total mess. So that hearing has a little bit of value, but I really do think it shows that there's a great interest in trying to use this technology to reimagine how our system of trust and accountability works. We're also seeing state laws change. Wyoming just recently signed into law a law that exempted crypto assets. These would be the financial bitcoins from securities law, and actually regulates them as a utility. Tennessee and Arizona have put in language revolved around how you recognize smart contracts under state law, if it's to be analyzed and sort of implemented through normal contract purposes, or if there's another way to do it. So we're going to see a lot of these changes, and those of you in states that haven't looked at it will probably see this coming up soon. And those of you that are in states that have either done some of these pilots or looked at these issues know that there's a real appetite for people. But the question has to be, really, do we need blockchain? And I think that's the million-dollar question for us, but it's also the one that we need to really put a disciplined study into. We don't want to, as I said, give up too much of what actually ensures the trust in the system now. And as a federal agency, the Department of Homeland Security released earlier this year this sort of thought rubric of, do you need blockchain, or can we just use better computer software? Can we use better operations between individual actors? So there's a series here of questions, and I won't go through them all, that you should ask yourself, or we need to be asking as we look at these studies and different pilots. Do we need a lot of data? Do we have issues with trust? Do we have issues with vulnerabilities and tampering? And so we go through these, and this is, as I said, just released, and Mike and I have kind of talked about it. There's a lot of value to walking through this. It's a very disciplined rubric, and I think one that's going to play a big part of our continued study in this space. And as we move forward with it, I think it's a good time to demo the first study and first pilot in this space revolving around licensing credentialing. Thank you, Eric.
We are a couple more slides here, and then we'll get into the video portion, which we have some demo of the project that we did. I did want to step back a little bit, and just when we talk about our participation and why we're looking at blockchain, and it's really just part of us looking at any technology that can help improve our functions, but technology that we think may be helpful to our members. So this certainly falls into that category. Blockchain and other technologies are promoting some interesting discussions in self-sovereign identity, and I think that and we've looked at this. This is a space Eric has done research in as well. Could be impactful in regulation and outside of regulation too, perhaps in everyday life. So that's a potential area where things could take hold. To that end, we're also trying to work with the NANS group. For those of you that aren't aware, that's the National Credentialing Organization. They're a member organization that works with hospital credentialers. And we see some overlap between the work that we do in licensing and the credentialing portion of licensing into physicians beginning employment. So if there's synergies here, and this is about trust networks and sharing information, we think that is a potential area of collaboration. So we called this lifetime credentials, the learning machine and block search process. When we wanted to do this, we wanted to pick just a slice of the administrative process, not try to recreate the whole workflow because there's a lot of moving parts. But we wanted to demonstrate a simple workflow. We selected verification forms. But it could be any other document, perhaps, that is part of the credentialing process. But we picked specifically the MedEd and GME verification forms. You'll see examples of that. Learning Machine was someone that we selected as our partner. We like them. They have ties to MIT. In fact, the system that you'll see, MIT has used the same technology to issue digital certificates of their own. We liked that they had an application that we could just tap into. And we also like that this is an organization that they're coming out from the education world. So when we talk about credentialing and the things that we checked, a lot of them are for educational institutions as opposed to just some startup that's looking to do anything with blockchain. So the demo you're going to see was created using what was then the current version of their software. This is a flow chart. We're going to walk through this step by step. It may look like a lot of points, but we broke the whole process down into 7 points. We're going to show you videos of step 1, 6, and 7, and we do have videos of each step, and we'll make those available after the fact. Another important part about this workflow that we wanted to go over, that the issuer, in this case it's a school, but it's really any institution, is where this process starts. And when we talk about trust, I think that's important. This is initiated at the school level or at the institution level. And then the recipient, they work back and forth. In our case, the learner is a physician, but they work back and forth between the institution. And then the physician, and this is the part that's different than today's processes, can send it directly to perhaps a medical board. They could send it to a CDO, an organization like FCVS, but this can also enable them to send it directly to a licensing board. Okay, so drilling down here a little bit, the steps may seem very granular and simplified, but we did it this way because we wanted to break the videos down in this manner. So the first step is that the institution invites the recipient to use this tool for their credentials. Okay, so we practiced this, and I'm hoping for no technical difficulties on the video. This is a couple points here. You're going to see this is an administrative tool. So only a system administrator would have authorized use of this. I think that's important. Also, this isn't, if you walk into an administrative tool, this is a dashboard that shows recent activity, and you'll see other functions up here, certificates and recipients. The dashboard view, what we're going to show is the selecting recipients to invite into the system. You can see the mouse there in the video. There's a test invitation list. Now I want to pause here. This is a test list, and if you work with these sorts of systems, it's fairly common to maintain a master list of participants and that list is then used to be uploaded into the system and used as an administrative tool. Users of our physician data center interact with that system in a similar manner, where you come up with your list. It allows you to verify the list as you go, and then, as you'll see here, as I continue the video, this list will be uploaded into the system. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. We started the video over. I won't pause it this time. So that's the list. The list was verified, and then you'll see there they'll click invite, and there'll be a message down at the bottom. So that's all that we'll see as part of this video. Moving on, this step, there's a two-step process for the learner, where they create their account, they accept that institution into their wallet, and they acknowledge back to the institution that they would like to begin the process. And as they do this, they set up, if you do read about blockchain, the keys, the cryptographic keys Eric alluded to are very important. It's this step of the process where the learner will have their keys set up, and those will be used in further steps in the process. Future viewing, but also in this step, step 3, where the credentials are quote-unquote hashed into the blockchain. And that hash is there. It's a combination of the information pertinent to that learner and then the recipient's public key as well as the institution's public key. And those create a unique code that cannot be duplicated. Again, we have videos that show stepping through the process, but these are just steps where we recorded them all so everybody could see the process detailed and sort of touch and feel it. They send the wallet to the recipient. They receive the certificate into their wallets, and then they're going to want to share it with an institution. So that's where the video will pick up. And you'll see when this person opens their wallet, there's the Federation of State Medical Boards. We did this when our old logo was in effect. But that's right now the only issue. We're in their wallet. It's possible that they could have multiple institutions in the same wallet. Okay, there's under the FSMB, there's 2 certificates. If you're familiar with these certificates, this is an exact copy of it using test data. I would point out that because of this application, it looks a little squished there and top to bottom, but if the certificate were to be printed, it would print in a regular form. So this process is sharing it, as I think we're probably all familiar with sharing things via apps, and it's sent to a specific email address. Here's the second certificate, and it's being shared as well. So scrolling through, again, if you're familiar with the form, this would all look familiar to you. We spent a lot of time making sure we had clean test data because these were live transactions on the blockchain. So a lot of the work was related to making sure we had good test data, and then there was a fair amount of post-production work on the videos. Once we used the application, it was fairly straightforward. So those have been sent and delivered to an email box. I think on the next video we can, I think that sort of sharing right now is the sort of how it's done there. We'll look at the verifying. This is also done online, although I will tell you that it can probably be, take the technology is set up so if it wanted to be an API or more of a machine transaction, that's possible. So this is signing into an email account. This would, be a work email. We use the Gmail account. That's the conversation. It will have both messages from the learner, the physician, the test physician. One thing I want to point out here, and I think that I could see this coming up as a question is, well, how do I know? Because you're going to see the verification step. At this point, because the institutions that would be using this would be known to medical boards and the people that consume these credentials, I think that there should be no surprises in who did this message come from. And you'll see here, we created a URL for our own test purposes that you could see. That would be a trusted URL. You could verify that the information came from a trusted party. You could also go online and do individual transactions outside of, this was shared as a link. That's where other ways at that website could be implemented, including API activity. So here you'll see, I'll click on the link. Now this will take us to that site. And when we get to the end here, you're going to see a verify button. It may be somewhat faint just because of the font that they used, but I want to point that out because this was not on the view-only certificate that the physician had. So you see some information, some recipient information, when it was issued, sort of additional verifying facts, and then there's a verify button if you can't see it. So we're going to click it. It's going to come back and say verified. I do want to point out, and again, for time purposes, we didn't show everything. We tested tampering with these documents. So we went in, we changed some information, and then, put it into the cycle. Well, let's see. They say this verifies, but let's see if we can modify information. And I will tell you that we were not able to do that. It was caught as an invalid transaction. But what you're going to see here, as we click verify, is a simple verified. And in the current version of the application, that's how they display that information. So that was one certificate, and we'll repeat it here for the second certificate. But again, once you were doing this wouldn't be like, today you get email and you don't know who it's from. These would be transactions that you would receive on a regular basis. And there it is again. So that simulates the sending and receiving of a certificate that was verified using the blockchain. And so getting into a little bit of our next steps. This is the first time we've presented this material, and we think it's valuable, and we hope that it will make it available to anyone who is interested. We are looking at launching a resource center on our website. It will have these videos, other overview materials, and not just related to blockchain, other technical specifications that we've worked on. So that should be launched shortly after the annual meeting in 2 weeks, or the annual meeting is in 2 weeks. We are also talking with some of our colleagues in the House of Medicine that this work was done just standalone for us because we wanted something that we could easily execute. We think in our next steps we'll be working in a partner in the House of Medicine or the credentialing world where we use the technology to maybe pilot data sharing or another pilot that we find of valuable scope.
And I think along with that, Mike, as you know, one of the big things here that we need to be working on, and I think the FSMB has a good place to be a thought leader and a convener of boards and others, is creating those governance standards for these sort of transactions. The governance standards to these are really the key. The technology it can come in many different forms, many different approaches, but what needs to be explained to those developers who are developing these apps or those venture capital funds that just want to throw this at everything is that there are real laws and real regulations that need to be complied with. The chain itself is not going to solve everything, but the chain can be used to do these processes to move these identity attributes and need to be governed in ways that state laws require, federal laws require. One of the few questions I had as soon as we started doing these tests would be, would something verified in this manner constitute a valid primary source document? Could you rely upon it the same way as as getting the hard copy of a transcript sent through a CVO or sent directly to you as a board because your state law or other, if you're an accrediting or a credentialing body, there's people that say you have to do it this way. That's the only way. I have to see the tangible piece of paper. We may need to start working on comprehensive changes that would allow these sort of transactions to occur within the House of Medicine, within the regulatory sphere. One of the other things we need to look at is what sort of privacy issues are going to be related around these transactions. There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of fear, but I think if we proceed and we have the right people in the room at the table, the regulators talking about how we want to use this versus a industrialist telling the regulators, here's how you're going to use it, I think that's a huge change, and I think it's something that I know that Mike and his team and I, and I think I'm sure a lot of boards are interested in making sure their voice is the one that is put forth first on how this is going to be done, not the other way around. And really that being part of that discussion is staying up to date on industry activity, making sure the boards are well represented, making sure that your concerns are heard, making sure you also know what's out there. I think that's a real mutual benefit to participating in these. And even if your board would be interested in a study or walk through better, this is a great time, a great learning curve for everyone. Part of that learning curve is really the resources that are out there, and there's a ton of things. Just don't go out and Google and Google blockchain, because you're not going to be able to really separate the wheat from the chaff on this. But there are some resources that are foundational. The first is that Bitcoin white paper, the Nakamoto paper. It's actually not a hard read. It does go a little bit into the cryptography, the math of it all, but the concept is there. There's a website called CoinDesk. It's the industry news website for a lot of blockchain things. It does a good job of staying up to date on just the financial transactions, but also how it's being used in shipping, how Walmart's using it to make sure that bananas sent from Colombia are tested to at all stages. It has a lot of healthcare news. I know that some of the Illinois projects got covered in there. It's also, I think, fairly objective. I found it very, very helpful as you try to learn this. Illinois has on their blockchain initiative website a lot of resources that, again, really, as a sort of a leader in this, they jumped on it early as a state. They've put together some great resources. And then there's other avenues if you're not a reader. There's podcasts. Unchained is the industry podcast, sort of the CoinDesk of the podcast. Epicenter as well. They kind of talk to people in the space. They're about 45 minutes to an hour. So those of you who are on your flights to annual meeting could download a few and listen to them and come in as an expert for us. There's also, I think, two other ways to learn about this. And the one is the Banking on Bitcoin Netflix documentary. Goes into the foundation and how this is being applied in finance. Gives a lot of the great background. And if you're looking for a more humorous approach, or at least a lighter side of Bitcoin, recently John Oliver on last week tonight put together about a 10-minute explanation of it, and the sticking line there that I started laughing at was that Bitcoin and blockchain take everything you don't know about computers and everything you don't know about finances and makes it something that you need to do. And I think his approach, although there's humor and satire to it, there's some value in his discussion of this. So there's much still to be learned. There's much to still be done on the FSMB side, but I think we are arming you as boards with the necessary information to engage if a legislator or a governor or whoever comes to you and says, here's something we want to look at, how's it going to impact you? But I think it's also something we need to be on top of, because as we all know, regulation, the view of regulation is shifting. I think the trust in some of the institutions that we have, the public doesn't have it anymore, and I think this is a way that we could reconstitute it for, I think, tomorrow, or actually today and tomorrow's society. So with that, I think Mike and I are open to some questions from those of you listening. Our contact information, if you don't already have it, is right there, and happy to be put in contact with you all and talk a little bit more about what we've been doing.